Hey everyone, welcome to Masonzero MTG. In this video, I'm going over my top 10 cards from Murders at Karlov Manor for Cube. And wow, this set has some really cool cards. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is one of the most interesting standard sets for Cube builders in a long time. With some exceptions, there are basically no parasitic mechanics, meaning a ton of cards in the set are playable in a variety of Cube environments. And I think part of this is the new design philosophy of draft sets moving forward with play boosters. Basically, there's one less card in play boosters than in old draft boosters, and the explanation for this from a design perspective is apparently that there is now less draft chaff in boosters, as Wizards has identified that there were always cards that you're last picking and then never playing in your draft deck. I'm not sure how this is going to pan out in reality or for drafts, but at least on the surface, this seems like it will lead to more playable sets in general, with less bad, unplayable cards. But of course, this video is mostly about strong and interesting rares and sometimes uncommons, so let's get into all of those now. Okay, let's get this first one out of the way. There is a new rare land cycle that has the basic land types, which means they are contenders for Cube. These are good, but they're not mind-blowing. They enter tapped, always, and have Surveil 1 when they enter the battlefield. So they're a little bit comparable to the Scry lands, except they're also fetchable. It's up to you whether the cycling lands are going to be better than these in terms of fetchable lands, although those don't have a full 10 card cycle. In general, these are okay, and a mid to lower powered cube will likely be happy to play them, and certainly if you're playing the Scry lands, these are probably better. Delny Streetwise Lookout is an aggro monster. Your small creatures can't be blocked by big creatures, turning your little 1/1 tokens and smaller aggro plays into legitimate threats that a deck with larger creatures won't be able to do much about. On top of that, it also has a trigger copying effect for these small creatures. So your Thraben Inspector, Luminarch Aspirant, and Loran of the Third Path triggers will be doubled up, granting you a lot of value despite just plain cheap spells. Splendid Reclamation is a fun card, but it requires a very specific deck and type of cube and strategy to really make an impact. So what if instead of it being a sorcery that only does that effect, if it was on a creature? Aftermath Analyst literally comes with Splendid Reclamation tacked onto it, mana cost and all. Otherwise, it's a 2-mana 1/3 that mills 3 when it enters the battlefield. This can start getting lands into your graveyard early, and it can block some early aggro creatures efficiently. Then just sacrifice it when you're ready. The land returning ability can also be activated at instant speed, which is a bit of an advantage over the sorcery spell version, although it is certainly more prone to removal. For what it's worth, being an elf might be relevant in some cubes as well. So definitely consider this card if elves and/or land and/or self-mill is part of your cube. Now here is an interesting card that does double duty. Repulsive Mutation is a buff spell or a counter spell, or it's both. For a green and a blue plus X, you can put X +1/+1 counters on a creature, and then counter a spell unless its controller pays mana equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. However, you don't have to do both those things. For example, you don't have to counter a spell. It says up to 1. So you can just use this as a buff spell to win the game, or to help a creature survive combat. There doesn't have to be anything on the stack to cast this, because it isn't strictly a counterspell. But also, you can just choose 0 for X, if you have a creature with enough power to counter the spell, making this effectively a 2-mana counterspell. So, counterspell. For a counter, I think this is more interesting than Syncopate and Mana Leak for sure, since it gives you these additional options, but of course, it locks you into playing a blue and green deck. What do you get when you combine Glorious Anthem with Impact Tremors? You get War Leader's Call. A 3-mana enchantment is going to need to be pretty good to be useful, but this augments a tokens deck nicely, buffing up a go-wide strategy and turning every creature and token into free damage. If you play either card in your cube, this is obviously a reasonable replacement, but I can see not every cube wanting it, of course, but I think it's pretty good, and again, does one of my favorite things that this set seems to be doing, combining 2 cards together into something that does double duty. Unyielding Gatekeeper gives you options, which is always great. The downside is that to get its great effects, you need to disguise it, which if you're unaware of is just morph, but the morph has ward 2. That's it. So you cast it face down for 3, then for 2 mana you can flip it face up, and then you can either flicker a non-land permanent you control, or exile a non-land permanent your opponent controls, and they get a 2/2 token. So it kind of combines the ideas of Skyclave Apparition and something like Flicker Wisp, letting you choose which one you want. For 5 mana, it's a little steep, but sometimes this is the price you pay for flexibility. Forensic Gadgeteer is perfect for a middle-powered cube that is high on synergy. in this case, artifact synergy. You get a clue token every time you cast an artifact spell, and activated abilities of artifacts cost 1 less to activate. This immediately synergizes with itself by reducing the activation cost of the clues you're making. Oh, and it also goes infinite with Basalt Monolith, which is totally fine, don't worry about it. Following Archmage's Charm is the new green Archdruid's Charm, the green version. It's a great modal spell with 3 very playable options. You can tutor a creature to your hand, tutor a land to the battlefield, put a counter on a creature and have it bite another creature, or exile an artifact or enchantment. Wait, that's kind of like 5 things actually, not 3. Wait, this card's crazy. The only downside is that it costs 3 green mana, which requires a steep investment in green. If your cube has the fixing to support a cost like this, or maybe a strong monocolored theme, Archdruid's Charm is a great cube card, but I can see people avoiding this purely for the mana cost alone. Drag the Canal is quite the interesting little toolbox of a card. In a pinch, it's a 2/2 with flash, and that's it. But if a creature died this turn, which is the ideal time to cast it, you will get a 2/2, 2 life, Surveil 2, and get a clue token. I think that seeing this as an instant makes it a little hard to evaluate. While this does technically change how the costs are distributed, and some other important aspects of the card, here's a different way to think about this card, including tacking on the draw from the clue token into the casting cost, just so you can view this card in a different way and decide if it's still playable for you, as this is sort of effectively what you're getting. Would this still be good if it was a creature? Anyways, it's a good card that gives you a creature plus card selection and card draw, so it's a good little utility card that you might consider running in your blue-black section. Cryptic Coat gets better and better the more you think about it. Okay, hear me out here. This card is basically True Name Nemesis. For 3 mana, you get an unblockable 3/2 that has Ward 2. But on top of that, if you cloak a creature, you can morph that creature up for its mana cost, potentially getting an even better creature. Plus, you can pay 2 mana to return the coat to your hand and then cast it again. This makes it a great mana sink for getting a ton of 2/2 creatures out, some of which could be actual creatures that you can later turn face up. The only time you may want to avoid this card is if you have a strong blue-white blink theme in your cube, since putting the creatures onto the battlefield this way would not cause their ETB effects to trigger, so it's kind of a non-bow. So just keep this in mind when including it in your list. So those are my top 10 cards for Cube from the set, but oh boy are there a lot of other great cards. I could have easily done a top 20 list. So if you have other cards you're excited about, I probably didn't forget about them, and you can let me know in the comments what you're looking to put in your cube. But this video isn't quite over. I have one more set of cards to talk about. Now I wouldn't normally talk about what cards to not play, but there are a few cards in this set that may seem playable and cube-worthy at first glance, but are actually unlikely to make an impact, and I think they're a trap that a lot of people are going to fall for. Undergrowth Recon looks like a Crucible of Worlds, but it's a more restrictive mana cost, and instead of taking up your land drop for the turn, you can simply return a land to the battlefield tapped on your upkeep. This actually works totally differently than Crucible though. Triggering on upkeep rather than being able to play the land whenever you want removes a lot of flexibility, even though you can technically get an additional land play each turn through this effect if you have lands in your graveyard. I think there are some environments that may prefer this, but in general, you should run Crucible of Worlds or Ramanap Excavator or both to support this kind of lands in the graveyard gameplay. Treacherous Greed seems great on paper. 3 mana and sack a creature to draw 3 cards, gain 3 life, and deal 3 to an opponent? Great. The only problem is, you need to sacrifice a creature that dealt damage this turn. This card does absolutely nothing if you're top decking, and you will likely need an evasive creature to get through. But then, are those 3 cards worth sacrificing your evasive creature that may already be winning you the game? This card is likely to sit dead in your hand for a long time, and then put you in a potentially worse position after casting it. I saw some people looking at Case of the Trampled Garden, and to be honest, I would not fault anyone for playing it. It's kind of an interesting card. However, the question to ask is this better than Curse of Predation? In some cases, maybe, but in a lot of cases, no. Curse of Predation always puts a counter on all of your attacking creatures. Case of the Trampled Garden will put a counter on 2 of your creatures, and then when they attack, you get to choose 1 creature to get a counter, and also trample. Assuming that, you solved the case. The trample is nice, of course, but you're getting far fewer counters, especially as the game goes on. So I think this card is a trap, and you should just play Curse of Predation. Okay, for real this time, the video is over. So thank you so much for watching, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next Masonzero MTG video.